All right, well, good morning. It's great to have each one here. We're going to be back in the book of Daniel, chapter number 11, as we continue on. Now, we left off with Daniel's prophetic announcement of Antiochus Epiphanes, a name that now echoes faintly through the corridors of history. But let us not forget that this was no ordinary history. It was divinely pre-written, etched in the prophetic record by the hand of God, centuries before it ever come to pass. And I appreciate the fact that you guys have hung in with me for the 35 verses of history. I know at times it wasn't particularly exciting, but we needed to get there because it lays the foundation for what we're about to look into. Now, Antiochus was a tyrant. Scripture declares that he was a vile person. But he was a preview. He was a shadow. He was a divine setup used by God to point forward to someone more sinister, someone that was to come after Antiochus. A figure so corrupt, so vile, so consumed by evil that Antiochus himself would be tame by comparison. This person, this one is yet to come. And he will burst onto the world stage not as a regional oppressor, but as a global ruler. And the horror he unleashes will eclipse anything history has ever known. He is the final embodiment of rebellion. He is the Antichrist. And his rise marks the beginning of the end. Now, he is called by many names. We will see him today as the Wilful King. In chapters 7 and 8 of Daniel, he's referred to as the little horn. He's called the King of fierce countenance, the Prince that shall come, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the one who brings destruction, the Antichrist. And in Revelation, he's known as the Beast. If a godless world refuses to receive the true Son of God, then through Daniel we learn that it will be handed over to the son of Satan. And make no mistake, the world is not ready for the hell that he will unleash. His rise will not be subtle, it will be sudden, it'll be global, and it'll be catastrophic. And it is here in Daniel 11 that the curtain begins to rise. The spotlight shifts from history past to the prophetic future. From Antiochus Epiphanes to the final tyrant, the Antichrist. What unfolds is not just political drama, but divine revelation. And remember, this last part of Daniel, the last few chapters of Daniel, is the most detailed vision that Daniel receives. And chapters 10, 11, and 12 are not a separate message, but one unified revelation, delivered by a heavenly messenger and stretching from Daniel's present time to the very end of days. What we read here in chapter number 11 is not just ancient text, but it's God's preview of the final chapter of human history. Keep also in mind that this revelation is relation to Israel as a nation. The earlier chapters of Daniel refer to the Gentile nations and how the flow of their history would impact Israel. Now we're looking at more focused in on what's going to happen in Israel in the last days. The final prophecy centers on a sobering truth. God has ordained a season of chastising for his people, Israel. Because of their persistent sinfulness, they were taken into Babylonian captivity. But that was not the end of their discipline, it was only the beginning. In chapters 10, 11, and 12, God sends a heavenly messenger to reveal that this chastising would continue until the end of time, until the rise of the Antichrist. The oppression of Israel by gentle powers would stretch across millennia, only ending with the arrival of the Messianic kingdom. The angel tells Daniel, in essence, Daniel, the land will be overrun, it will be oppressed, it will be devastated, and it will be plundered. And it will go on until the Messiah comes again. History has confirmed every word. What was foretold has unfolded with stunning precision. And folks, I know we covered a lot of stuff in the last few messages over the last 35 verses, but when you actually spend time comparing the scriptures, what Daniel writes and what actually happened in history past, the accuracy is just amazing. And it's not really amazing because it's God, He wrote it, but it's just phenomenal. Now, the first 35 verses of Daniel 11 lay out the relentless oppression of God's people under the Persian and the Greek empires. And as we saw last time, the accuracy of that prophecy is nothing short of astounding. The era was marked by a succession of key monarchs, key kings, each one rising to power and contributing to the suffering of the land and to its people. The first one we looked at in verse number 2 was Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, the king, the great Persian king who dominated the land of Palestine. And there were other Persian kings that did so as well. The second major king was Alexander the Great. We saw him from verses 3 to 9. Alexander and those who followed him, the great world-conquering Greek who founded the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Seleucids in the north and the Ptolemies in the south. And between the two of them, they literally dominated and oppressed the land for hundreds of years. Then the third king that we focused on was Antiochus the Great, verses 10 to 20. The great Seleucid king who had the lasting control. The first Seleucid and Ptolemaic kings fought back and forth, and right in the middle was Israel. And Antiochus went in, and Antiochus the Great, and the king had lasting control over Israel. Then in verse 21, we looked at the last of the four kings, and that's Antiochus Epiphanes. The next in the Seleucid line who ruled Palestine, whose scriptures declare was a vile person. He oppressed, he desecrated, he slaughtered, he devastated the Jews on a level that was only really seen in the days of Hitler. He devastated the Jews, their people, their temple, their worship. Everything about them was oppressed and was he tried his hardest to obliterate them. So all through the Persian period and all through the Greek period, the angel says to Daniel, the people will continue to be oppressed. And the question is why? And you remember from Daniel receiving the vision till the end, till the coming of the Antichrist, we're covering it. That's like 500 odd years. And the angel says your people will continue to be oppressed not only up to that 500-year period, but beyond it. And the question is why? Now verse 35 is where we stopped last week, and really that's where the key is held. Daniel says to purge and to make them white even to the end of time. The whole purpose of this chastisement, the whole purpose of this oppression was to refine and to purify and to make the people of Israel spotless. You see, suffering has always been a great spot remover. Even in New Testament time, Peter writes, after that you have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. James writes, the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, not wanting nothing. So the angel tells Daniel that the purging, the purification of suffering will occur even until the end of time. This time phrase signifies that the persecution of Israel will continue until the final time, until the time that God has appointed. And that time will only come to an end after the time of Jacob's trouble, the Great Tribulation, the last half of the 70th week of Daniel. In other words, the anti-Semitism and overt Jewish persecution will continue until the Messiah puts a stop to it at his second coming. And then we come to verse 36. Now between verses 35 And verse 36 is a gap. And it's a gap of centuries. It's a prophetic gap, and it's already around 2,200 years and counting. And it's a leap forward to where we meet the final king, the Antichrist. And he emerges in verses 36 through to verse 45. And this really marks the climatic point of Daniel's vision. Now, up until this point, we've traced the rise and fall of empires, the Persian era, the Greek era, and now the final phase of the Roman era, the last chapter in God's chastising of Israel. All this ties back to Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the great statue in Daniel chapter number 2, where he outlines the successive kingdoms. Babylon, ruled by Nebuchadnezzar, was the head of gold. The chest and arms of silver represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The bronze waist and thighs symbolized Greece, who was led by Alexander the Great. The legs of iron depicted the Roman Empire, strong and crushing. And you remember that the Roman Empire was never conquered. It just imploded. But it will be revitalized. It will come back into power, but it will not be as strong as it was. And that's represented by the feet, which is a mixture of iron and clay. And that, pictures the revived Roman Empire in its final form. And it is in this form, or this empire, that the Antichrist comes back to power. But now with the arrival of the Antichrist, we've reached the feet of the statue. A strange mixture of iron and clay. This represents the revived Roman Empire, fractured, weaker than its former glory, yet still formidable. And it's this final form from which the Antichrist will rise. The final figure, the Antichrist, will embody all the evil power of Ahasuerus, Alexander, Antiochus the Great, and Antiochus the Epiphanes. In effect, what we learn from each one, what each one symbolizes and pictures, goes into the makeup to kind of describe what this Antichrist is going to be like. So if you like, it takes all of the shadows and all of the foretelling of what the evilness of the Antichrist is going to be, but it magnifies it. He is the counterfeit Christ. He is the master deceiver who rises with promises of peace. He brokers a covenant with Israel, offering protection and aligning them with the West. But midway through the 7-year tribulation, he breaks the pact. He desecrates the temple. He defiles the worship. He blasphemes the name of their God. And with that betrayal, he unleashes a final storm. The Holocaust of Armageddon. Yet even this horror has a boundary, and it will be cut short by the return of Jesus Christ, who comes in glory to judge, to redeem, and to reign. Now beginning in verse number 36, there's a sharp break, and it is introduced to us at the end of verse 35. It says, even to the time of the end, and that's the key phrase. This is going to go on to the time of the end. Up until this point, the prophecy has dealt with history past. Now we come into a different scene, which is history future and the time of the end. And so we sweep across a vast landscape of history, thousands of years in the making, to arrive at this one final world ruler, the one Scripture calls the Wilful King. He is the culmination of empires, the embodiment of rebellion, and the centerpiece of end-time prophecy. What we'll do is we'll focus on 3 aspects of this key figure. This morning we're going to look at his character. Next week we'll look at the conflict, and then we'll look at his condemnation. If you read this portion of Daniel and felt overwhelmed, folks, you're not alone. But it's not as difficult as it seems. The text flows with divine precision, and if we follow it carefully, we'll see the portrait of the final ruler come into sharp focus. So let's walk through it together and let's let the Scripture speak. Let's look at his character. Let's look at verse number 36, sorry. And the king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Daniel simply refers to the Antichrist here as the king, without identifying that he's from the north or the south, and this marks a clear shift in the narrative. The only other unqualified use of the king is in this chapter appears in verse 3 when he describes Alexander the Great, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. So you can see Daniel's kind of tying the Antichrist back to Alexander the Great, who did what he wanted, and he's saying the Antichrist is going to follow in Alexander's footsteps. This same phrase, do according to his will, is echoed in verse 36, linking the Antichrist to Alexander in terms of unchecked power and self-will. The figure is also one Daniel spoke of earlier in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, as the prince who is to come. A ruler who will arise from the people that destroyed Jerusalem, namely the Romans. Together, these passages form a prophetic profile, a world leader emerging from the legacy of Rome who will act with absolute authority and lead a final rebellion against God. Now, most Bible students have called him in this verse the Wilful king, the king who will do according to his will. And this particular figure comes under several titles in the Bible. As I've said before, in chapter 7, he's also referred to as the little horn. In chapter 8, he's called the king of fierce countenance. In chapter 9, he's called the prince that shall come. 2 Thessalonians, he's called the man of sin and the son of perdition. And in Revelation 13, he's called the beast. But here, Daniel labels him as the willful king. And I think that's a great title for him. Now, all of these references have something to do with his personality, something to do with his character. So by looking at all these different descriptions, we actually start to build a bit of a picture up of what the Antichrist is going to look like, what sort of person he's going to be. And here Daniel tells us the king will do according to his will. Now, the angel gives us several factors that indicate his true character. First of all, the Antichrist's character is defined by absolute prerogative. Now, I use the word prerogative here because they're all going to be P's. And I had to get something to go with the P's. So prerogative. He exercises complete authority. He makes every decision. He acts entirely according to his own will. He does not share the rule. He does not collaborate. He is an absolute sovereign, a dictator in the purest sense. His reign will be marked by utter selfishness, driven by self-will, self-interest, and self-glorification. He rules alone, energized by his own pride and ambition. But behind the seemingly unstoppable force is a darker power at work. And if you compare Daniel 11 to Romans 13, you get a picture that there's actually someone behind the Antichrist, and it's Satan himself, because Satan empowers him. And in fact, in Revelation 13, it says the dragon, Satan, gives power to the beast, which is the Antichrist. The Antichrist may appear to be acting independently, but he is the visible face of a deeper spiritual rebellion orchestrated by the enemy of God. One writer said he will come to the world with a baptism of hell. He will have full demon cooperation. He will establish an absolute world monarchy. And, I can't help but look at what's going on in the news and see how everything is kind of moving that way. Everybody is trying to bring, someone to take control of all these warring nations and everything. And this is all laying the groundwork and the platform for which the Antichrist will be able to take over the world. So he will establish an absolute world monarchy, and his credentials for pulling it off will be his ability to do signs and wonders and powerful miracles to deceive people. He will literally rule the world, and under his global domination, the world becomes the protector of Israel. Not out of love, but out of a strategic desire. Everybody wants Israel. Russia, the Eastern powers, the Arab world, and even a coalition from the south, likely parts of Africa. And in response, the West steps in as Israel's shield, aligning with her politically and militarily. There are other rulers, because you remember in Revelation 17, it talks about the 10 kings, but they are mere puppets, submitting their authority to this one dominant figure. Revelation 13 also introduces us to his cohort, the false prophet, but even he operates at a subordinate level, simply executing the Antichrist as well. So this guy is going to come in, he's going to be the absolute world ruler. Nations are going to try to oppose him, but it's going to come in too late, and it's only going to come in after his sovereignty, after his rule has been firmly established. He's going to have the false prophet who will help control all the world religions, and he will help him, and he will appear to be real powerful and in control, but he's merely going to be a puppet of the Antichrist. This guy is going to rule with absolute prerogative. He will make every decision, he will enforce every law, and he will demand total allegiance. In accordance with Revelation 13, every person on earth will be required to take his mark, the mark of the beast. And we understand, again, back in the day, people would say, oh, that doesn't make sense, but we all understand now with credit cards and stuff like that, if you don't have the card, you're not buying and selling. And if they do away with the credit cards and they go to electronic money, if you don't have the mark, you can't buy and sell. So he will have total control. Secondly, the Antichrist will not only be characterized by absolute prerogative, but he will be characterized by pride. A pride so consuming that Scripture says he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes was certainly proud. He was an egomaniac by every measure. But even he didn't exalt himself above every god. In fact, he was a deeply religious person in a pagan sense. He worshipped the gods of the Greeks, and he even attempted to get those within his empire to fall into line and worship the gods of the Greeks. The Antichrist, however, will be utterly irreligious, He will set himself up above every deity, every form of worship, every altar and every shrine. Paul echoes this in 2 Thessalonians when he says, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, all that is worship, so that he, as God sitteth in the temple of God, showeth himself that he is God. There are egotists, and then there's this man. This man will sit in the temple declaring himself to be God, because he will be the egotist of egotists. Daniel says he will exalt and magnify himself above every god. Paul reinforces that idea. This man will elevate himself above all the religions, above all the gods, and above all the worship. For a time, Scripture says that he will be tolerant of religion. But when it's finished serving his purpose, no longer serves his purpose, then he will suddenly consume it, and he will set himself up as the object of worship. He even allows Israel to worship in the temple for a while, but in the middle of the tribulation, he desecrates it. He commits the abomination of desolation all over again, defiling the holy place and unleashing a slaughter against the Jewish people that has never been witnessed before. In fact, the Bible says that 2 out of every 3 Jews will die. Now, I did a quick look at it this morning. There's roughly around 9.5 million Jews living in Israel. So that means 6.33 million Jews will be slaughtered by the Antichrist if he was here today. And it's funny how that figure, based on today's population, is eerily close to the 6 million Jews slaughtered by Hitler in World War II. And then in the ultimate act of blasphemy, he will set himself up as the God of gods, enthroned in the temple, speaking great things, not in praise, but in defiance of the true and living God. And that brings us to the third defining trait of the Antichrist. He is not only proud, but he's profane. Daniel 11 verse 36 tells us he will speak astonishing things against the God of gods. This is no ordinary arrogance. He is a blasphemer without equal. We find the same description in Revelations 13 verses 5 and 6. It says that it was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he opened his mouth to blaspheme against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and all those who dwelt in heaven. He is quite literally the mouthpiece of hell. When he speaks, hell speaks. He uses words that are profane, venomous, and defiant. Daniel 7:25 adds that he will even attempt to change God's moral laws, to rewrite the standards that God himself established. So he doesn't just only oppose God, but he tries to replace him and everything that's associated with him, redefining truth, redefining morality, and redefining worship, and saying that worship will be done on his terms and not God's terms. And you can see this happening given what we see today. We're witnessing an aggressive push to erase the binary distinctions between male and female, replacing them with a fluid spectrum of self-defined identities. And we have to believe that this is true, you know. Morality is being banned and debauchery embraced and even enforced in the workplace. Christianity is aggressively suppressed, but native superstitions are being taught in our schools. And when Daniel says that he will speak marvelous things, the Hebrew word used there means unbelievable or shocking speech. So he will speak things that are unbelievable and shocking against God. Things so outrageous, so insolent that they defy comprehension. His blasphemy will be unique, unmatched in its intensity and scope. And he will exalt himself and defy God in ways that no one in history has ever done before. And again, we ask, why? Why does he tolerate this? And the answer is found in the purpose behind it. This is all part of God's purging process. His plan to purify Israel. And it's temporary. It'll only go on for as long as God will allow it. In fact, Revelation 13 tells us it'll only happen for about 42 months, 3.5 years. Daniel 11 verse 36 confirms it, says, he shall prosper only until the indignation is accomplished. In other words, God sets a time limit. His wrath will unfold, but it will not last forever. And why does God permit such intense oppression of the Jewish people? Because it is their ultimate, it is this ultimate blasphemy and this unthinkable persecution that finally brings Israel to the place where they recognize Jesus Christ as the true Messiah. Folks, a lot of us have done the road to recovery. And the first step is, if you're gonna fix what's wrong in your life with the help of God, the first thing is we've got to step out of denial. We've got to actually admit that there's a problem. And sometimes it's not until you hit absolutely rock bottom are you prepared to stop making excuses and blaming everybody else, but actually take an inward look and say, I've got a problem and I need to deal with it. And this is what happens with Israel. And I really want you to understand this. God's been chastising them for thousands of years, but they still haven't got to the point. It hasn't got bad enough to where they get to the point where they recognize that Jesus is the true Messiah, and he is the one they need to look to rectify all the problems that they've got going on with the nation and with them as a people. And so God allows this blasphemy and this unthinkable persecution to get Israel to the point where she recognizes that Jesus is their true Messiah. Scripture shows us that nothing short of this will break through. Sometimes people have to hit absolute rock bottom before they look up and cry out for help. And like I said, that's been so far roughly 2,200 years of chastisement, and Israel still isn't turned to Christ. Then we get to verse 37. Verse 37 reveals yet another disturbing trait of the Antichrist. He's not only marked by prerogative, pride, and profanity, but he's also perverted. The angel shows us three fundamental or foundational aspects of human behaviour, things that men naturally hold dear, and yet this man rejects them all. His perversion runs deep, striking at the very core of what it means to be human. First, we're told that he shall not regard the gods of his father. And that word God, I know in King James it's God, it's actually plural, it should be gods. This means he doesn't even honour the traditional religions or ancestral worship of his forefathers. He has no reverence for the beliefs passed down through the generations. Where most men feel a sense of connection to their heritage, he feels nothing. He also holds and has no proper perspective of family. Paul warns in 2 Timothy 3:3 that it is in the last days men would be without natural affection. The Greek word used there refers specifically to that of family love, the kind of affection that binds parents to children and siblings to one another and generations together. In the last day, Paul says that bond will break, families will fall apart, and don't we see that happening today? People will lose respect for their parents, their heritage, and their traditions that have been handed down to them. And that's why culture has been attacked, by so many people. We're told that our culture is bad and we ought to hate it because the family is breaking down, the traditions that have been handed down are being broken down. And this is, again, laying the foundation for which the Antichrist will rise upon. And this is exactly the kind of man we see in the Antichrist. He has no natural affection, no family loyalty, and no reverence for his ancestors. Where most people feel a deep-rooted connection to the faith and the values of their family, he feels only contempt. He is perverted at the most basic level of human behaviour, rejecting both spiritual heritage and familial love. And this is not just rebellion, it's a total inversion of what God has designed. And it sets the stage for the kind of godless, loveless world that he will lead. Secondly, Daniel verse 37 tells us that the Antichrist will not regard the desire of women. Now this is a tricky tricky phrase to interpret, and scholars often offered various views on it. Some have suggested it may imply sexual perversion, possibly even homosexuality, as he lacks the normal desire for women. But I think there's a more broader application here, and it likely points to a deeper truth. I think that he has no capacity for natural affection. In plain English, I don't think he's a lovable person. I don't think he's the type of person that feels a natural empathy or love or affection for other people. No love for a wife, no love for his mother, no love for his sister. He is emotionally barren, devoid of any relational warmth that defines healthy human contact. His perversion runs deeper than mere sexuality. It is a rejection of the very fabric of family and affection. Thirdly, he doesn't regard any God. Now, you don't have to travel far in this world to see that most people believe in some form of deity. In times of crisis, even the most skeptical often cry out to something beyond themselves. In the war, they said there are no atheists in a foxhole. Across cultures and continents, humanity invents religion because it instinctively believes in the supernatural. But this man is different. He is utterly irreligious, a complete anomaly in human history. He has no love for family, no love for women, and no love or reverence for any God. He is perverted at the most fundamental level of human nature. And here's the sobering reality. The world is ready for that kind of leader. In today's culture, it is no longer shocking for someone to reject traditional family structures or moral standards. In my lifetime, I know I've seen where people would stand for positions of leadership in the community, like a mayor or a city council or something like that. And if they rejected the traditional family structures or had differing moral standards to what was considered normal, they were dismissed outright. They were just not even taken seriously. But today, those kind of people are celebrated as individuals. You know, they're expressing their individuality. In fact, many educational systems now present sexual perversion as just another lifestyle choice. You know, it's like choosing a flavour of ice cream. And as for God, well, he's pushed to the margins. Society would gladly accept an atheist leader, especially one who pretends to be spiritual, only and when it suits him. So the Antichrist will be characterized by prerogative, by pride, by profanity, by perversion, and fifthly, he will be marked by power. The end of verse 37 says, he will magnify himself above all. And in verse 38 it explains how. It says, but in his estate, which literally means in the Hebrew, in its place. What place? The place where normal human desires for family, affection, and worship should reside. In their place, he will honour the God of forces. Now, the Hebrew word for forces appears 6 times in this chapter, in verses 1, 7, 10, 19, 31, and 39. And every time it refers to a stronghold, a military power base. And so what this is saying is that in place of love and worship, he will worship power. His God will be war. Daniel 7:23 confirms that he shall devour the whole earth, tear it down and break it in pieces. This is in the final form of the Roman Empire. This is the final form of the Roman Empire, which has been revived, militarized, and globalized. He will rule through intimidation. You know, there could be nuclear weapons, chemical warfare, whatever technology is in vogue at the time. Verse 38 continues and said, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honour with gold and silver and with precious stones and precious things. In ancient times, people gave their wealth to their gods, laying gold, silver, and treasure at the feet of their idols. But the Antichrist will take all that wealth and pour it into his war machines. He honours a God his ancestors never knew, the God of forces, the God of war. And as we know, war is expensive. And it may be that he seizes the riches of the world to fund his global war machine, to fund his global domination. And verse 39 continues to unveil the character of the Antichrist. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God. The foreign God is none other than the God of war, the embodiment of military might and conquest. He will operate through the strongest fortress, meaning the most fortified and powerful military structures. And he will use the war machine to expand his influence and to control the world. And the verse goes on, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, he shall cause him to rule over many and shall divide the land for gain. A more literal translation reads, those who recognize him, he will honour, causing them to rule over many, allotting land as a reward. In other words, once he seizes control of the earth, he will strategically distribute power and territory. But make no mistake, he is in control. and everybody else are his puppets. So he will distribute land and power to those that pledge loyalty to him, and he will divide the spoils, offering positions of leadership and possessions of land. I don't know about you, but as we're looking at this characteristic, I'm thinking, that's Alexander the Great, that's Antiochus Epiphanes. You can see how these prehistoric figures all go to give you a good idea of the character of the Antichrist. This is how he secures allegiances, by rewarding loyalty with influence. Those who cooperate will be given a measure of autonomy, a sense of independence, a piece of territory. But make no mistake, he remains on top, and he is orchestrating it all. It's a brilliant tactic of control. Obligate the conquered, reward the compliant, and maintain dominance through strategic distribution. It will look appealing. Work with me and I'll work with you. Work with me and I will give you land. Work with me and I will give you riches. But it's all part of a global deception. And when you consider the trajectory of modern ideologies, particularly the rise of systems that promise equality but deliver control, this is kind of chilling. Communism, for example, often portrays itself as a system of sharing, all things and equal for everybody. But in reality, it functions as the ultimate dictatorships. The Antichrist regime will mirror that. Centralized power, distributed rewards, and total control. So we see his character unfold. Absolute prerogative, pride, profanity, perversion, and now power. A power that manipulates, rewards, and dominates. And folks, this is only the beginning. So there you have it. The chilling portrait of the Antichrist revealed in Daniel chapter 11. He is a man of prerogative, ruling with absolute authority, making decisions without counsel or conscience. He is consumed by pride, exalting himself above every god, every tradition, and every truth. He is marked by profanity, speaking blasphemy that shake heaven itself, defying the name and the holiness of God. He is steeped in perversion, rejecting the most human affections. No love for family, no desire for women, no reverence for any deity. And he is driven by power, worshipping the god of war, building a military war machine that will dominate the globe. This is just not a political figure. This is the embodiment of rebellion against God. And yet, even in all his fury, and in all his might, and in all his cunning, he is still on a leash. His time is short, his reign is temporary, and his end is certain. Because when the dust settles and the war machine collapses, Jesus Christ returns, not as a suffering servant, but as a conquering king. He will crush the Antichrist, redeem his people, and establish his eternal kingdom. The world may be ready for the Antichrist, but the church must be ready for the coming Christ. Thank you this morning.